Everyone, welcome to part 3 of the Kubernetes 1.26 Retro. My name is Jeremy, and I'm going to be the facilitator today. Hopefully, we can get through everything that's left on our document today. We have a few things in the parking lot section and a few things left in our what we'll do differently section. So we'll go through those and then try to make as much progress as possible. I think James is going to be our note taker again today. Thank you, James. Anybody else that wants to contribute to the docs, feel free. I'll drop the link into the chat. This meeting, before we get started, is covered by the CNCF Code of Conduct, so please be mindful of the things you say. It'll also be recorded. It is being recorded and will be available on YouTube. So if you just keep that in mind as we get going. So with that, we will start back up into what we will do differently. And this is another SIG-Docs related topic. I don't know if Ray will be here or not from the SIG-Docs perspective, but if anybody has any extra context on this item, it is proposal to create a SIG-Docs lead co-chair handbook for the release. This handbook, potentially residing in K website, would contain bifurcation of the responsibilities between the release team docs, comms, and SIG-Docs, just to clarify who should be doing what. And then information that's really similar to the release team docs role handbook, but with specific triaging information from the docs POV if the release runs into any issues. Does anybody have any extra context or any thoughts on making that a reality?
Maybe some thoughts from my side.
Go for it.
This time it was a little. It took quite some time to get the docs ready, so I think some documentation or handbook for the on all sides is pretty much like a step forward to make this process more like cleaner and straightforward what we need to do. So I think that's a good idea.
Do you think the issues that you encountered were purely because of lack of documentation, or was it a confluence of unfortunate events?
So it was partially due to the documentation. It was not 100% clear what we need to do, or it was not. I mean, there were like a couple of like possibilities how you could understand the documentation or the handbook, and then there was also the problem that we got the release on Friday, and some of the docs leads were obviously already on the weekend, and there was a problem of getting then clarification on the handbook. Yeah. I don't know like how the previous cycles were, because I think this handbook, I think Ray updated it a couple of releases ago, so I didn't heard anything bad last time.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I don't know. It would be interesting to follow up on that.
Yeah, I think the Friday thing was unfortunate from a scheduling standpoint.
Yeah. Also, maybe it would be good to add this to the lead handbook to check in with the release lead a couple of days before the deadline to see if everything is in order, because there's like some tasks for the release docs lead to do like 2 or 3 days before the release cut. And I mean, some of those tasks have been done. We completed some of those tasks, but not all of them. So it was a little messed up. So maybe also some documentation on the release lead side would be good.
Okay. Do you think that you can take an action item to update the release lead docs?
Yep.
Handbook?
Yeah. Yeah, I already have a PR open, so I can add action item or another comment to it. Yeah.
Do you think it would make sense for the incoming docs lead to maybe work with the SIG-Docs leads to figure out if this is a handbook that should be created?
So there's already quite a good handbook. So there's like a lot of detailed screenshots and everything. So I don't think another handbook is needed or another like big guideline how to do it. Maybe just like to rephrase it a little bit, that somebody who never done those steps is kind of familiar with the overall phrasing and how it's
and then just
done.
more coordination with SIGDocs.
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds good to me. Does anybody have any different thoughts, any other suggestions around this one before we move on? All right. Next one up is Federico Combs. You want to talk to us about this issue?
Yes. Well, let me open the agenda.
Okay, sorry. It's I'll read it, and then while you're opening it, should we make the feature blog series more visible by adding them to the release article when they're all done or as they're published?
Yeah, it's just an open idea to get the others feeling. I currently feel that the feature blog series is great because it adds feature blogs to the release, but it doesn't really have this like unit view outside of it. So it's a series of blogs that happen after the release, and looking at it from this way, if you have more blogs that are published right after the last one, it's essentially the same. I was just thinking if it would make sense, for example, after they are all published, to add I don't know, a section in the release article that would link to the feature blogs or something like this, or if it really doesn't matter and we should leave it as is.
I think the idea is really great to do it. How we do it is something I think we should bring it up with SIGDocs people.
Yep.
Because there are multiple ways to do it. I have not seen many blogs being updated after they're published, and like with such kind of information specifically. I know as a matter of fact that Hugo has something called a series, or it has different kind of taxonomies, but I'm not sure if the Kubernetes website currently supports it.
Yeah.
But if they do, and we can introduce a taxonomy called series, that would really solve this purpose. But again, this discussion I feel like mostly to be in the scope of like SIGDocs specifically, and we should really bring this up with them.
Agreed.
Leo, you also have your hand up, and then Xander after that.
Yep, +1 on what Nabarun said. I don't think like updating the blog post at the end is very good, because maybe it would make more sense to just publish an entire new blog post. So the idea of updating blog post with like adding also content to it, I don't know if that's the way to go. But bringing this to SIGDocs sounds to me like a good step. Yeah.
I think one, I would definitely want to have the conversation with the incoming communications lead as well, to get their thoughts on it. And two, putting my product manager hat on, if we could get traffic data from the website into like how many clicks the core blog post receives after all of the feature blogs have been published versus before, and then also take a look at like how many clicks the feature blogs themselves typically receive after the release. It could give us a good idea whether it would be worth it to add the links after the fact if enough people are actually revisiting the core feature blog or the core release blog after that date to make that worth it. Yeah, I would wonder about pulling that data from like the Netlify admins or whoever owns that. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
All right. Any other comments on that? I do like the idea of trying to get like clicks and impressions or other kind of marketing things out of those blogs to see how they're useful and maybe think about better ways. All right.
I
go
don't
ahead.
know if it's everything, but I think you can just look at the Kubernetes analytics. Like there's just a link on the Kubernetes website somewhere. I don't know if it has enough detail, but
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, you've given me a new toy to play with.
Here, I'll add that link into the docs while you're typing.
cool.
All right. Next up, we have a pair of items from Grace. Don't think Grace is here. The first one, what is the process for subteam leads with shadows who are unresponsive? Where can we document this? I don't think we have documented this.
Yeah, I think
go
me
ahead.
and Lego can both speak on this one because this was a conversation that happened with us.
Okay.
But there's this unspoken like kind of knowledge that gets passed down from lead to lead, but not until an issue actually arises, that if you have entirely unresponsive shadows, that you can remove them. But that information isn't communicated until a problem arises to a point where a sub-team lead complains about it to the release lead. And two, it's not documented anywhere. I don't know how to remove an unresponsive shadow or what constitutes an unresponsive shadow. And I think that this is something that should be documented and addressed before it becomes a problem. And furthermore, like shadows should be made aware, and it should be documented in a place where shadows can see it, that if they get too busy in the middle of a release cycle, that they do have the option and the ability to prioritize themselves and step back, right? So I guess what actually is the process there? Can a shadow be replaced?
Yes.
And where should we document that? Because it should be documented. This is not the type of thing that should be passed down like
Agreed.
as some kind of like secret passing of the torch thing between leads, you know?
So I think there's probably opportunity to put this in a few places. One, the emeritus advisor, I think, can come into play here. I think part of their job is to, this is me putting it on my previous release lead and release lead and EA kind of role. I think that we have done this in the past before this release too, just for clarity. I think that we should document it if it's not documented anywhere. It probably should be documented in the emeritus advisor handbook, the release team lead handbook, and in the shadow documentation itself. I'm trying to find where that is. Nabarun, as a person that has done both roles as well, do you have any feedback or thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I feel like we should document it. And I mean, for long time, it has been like unspoken role of the EA to like advise whenever such situations occur. And traditionally, the solution that we have taken is like the lead shadows go ahead and like assume the roles that they're comfortable with. And that has happened in my release in the past. where shadows were unresponsive in the middle of the cycle, and we had to like go ahead and do the work ourselves. About what should exactly be the remediation measures, I think we can noodle on the same change PR whenever we make that PR. That sounds to me like a reasonable resolution right now. On how we remediate missing shadows is something we can discuss separately.
We should probably open the tracking issue for this to capture it and make sure we identify the places where we want to do this. So Leo or Kat, do you want to take an action to start an issue in SIG release so that we can have this as a top level kind of tracking thing, and then we can identify where we want to put this into the handbooks, and maybe in the issue kind of iterate on what the
absolutely
specifics should look like.
Yeah, happy to. And I agree with Federico that like what constitutes enough inactivity to be like removed should be decided too, because it is important.
Yeah, I think a lot of times that's been subjective in the past, and it would be good to standardize that. Okay, thank you, Kat, for taking the action to do that one.
Yep.
And then what's the next one from Grace? When's a good time to wipe the enhancements label? Do we need any signals from anyone? So originally it said board, and I think the board was changed to labels.
There was a discussion in Slack a while ago about, do we want to create a new board or wipe the existing board, like just archive everything on the board and create a new board, or add everything back to the same board. And we decided to create a new board to preserve that history. So then I think the question was, when do we remove, especially that lead opted in label, to make sure leads re-opt in?
Yeah, that probably needs to happen. Oh, Federico, you got your hand up.
No, it's very just to add that this is an important point, because the board currently is actually linked in the release article. So if we were to reuse it, we would I would have to go and change. And this was something that was not thoroughly discussed before, but this is an important one. I was assuming at the time that we would be creating new boards for new releases. If this isn't, if this is true, then another thing that we should think is if there's any lifetime thing around GitHub boards. I don't know, because if so, maybe we should drop the link that we have on the release article as well.
I think in the past, when we used this sheet, we always created a new one, partially for historical purposes, so you could go back and see what had happened. And if I think keeping and reusing the same one will lose. I think that was comments that were from the Slack thread. Nabarun, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to iterate on the fact that we kind of had decided to not wipe the board ever, primarily because of archival reasons. And if we wipe the board, then we would break some contract that we decided long back with everyone who consumes features of Kubernetes, because they come back to boards like this and look at like what was shipped in a particular release cycle. So wiping that board would basically change that context. On wiping the labels, I feel like we should follow the same ideology that we have been doing till date. As in, when do we set track DS to track no? Start of the cycle.
Yeah.
When do we remove the leads opted in label? Exactly at the same time. When the next enhancements lead starts working on the release cycle and starts like populating the board with initial metadata, I think it's that moment when all of this should be wiped away. It can also be done like end of the release, but usually people are busy with like team transition, and starting of the cycle serves like a really great time to do it.
Yeah, and I was waiting for the PR into test infra to lift the code freeze, and then I have been removing some of the labels already, because it does say in the week 0 of the handbook I've been treating it the same way as the tracked yes, no, remove them at the beginning, or like the week 0 work.
Just one note I want to say, like when you tinker with the labels, since we are doing the project boards for the first time, just have a look whether the previous board metadata gets changed, like the issue membership. Because
the issues stay on the board, but one of the columns on the board is all of the labels that were applied to the PR. And those do get reflected across like all of the boards that the labels are in. And I've been making sure to not touch the milestones for labels that have already been completed and things like that, as says in the handbook. But we do have the history of in the board what phase or what stage the enhancement was targeting in that release, and if it was dropped or not, in separate columns in each one of the release boards. So I think we can use that as the source of truth for the historical boards instead of looking at what labels are on them, because the labels are more of a point in time, the current state.
Yep. So the idea is that we may not even need like what was dropped, because initially with the spreadsheets, we kind of thought like, okay, if we know what is removed from the cycle, we may create some insights, but we never ended up like using those insights. What is most valuable is what was shipped in this release and what did it graduate to.
Yep.
If that's the context we can preserve, that would be great. Anything else I feel are like optional enhancements on top of this information.
Yeah, all of that should be preserved in different columns on the boards for each release, just not the labels.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, if 1.26 board contains all the N enhancements that we shipped, that should be fine.
Leo, I saw you had your hand raised too.
Yes, I was just wondering why we have this. Cool. I mean, is there like a reason why we have this on the retro? Because what is not, so from this discussion, I get we don't change anything, right? So we stick kind of to what we also did in the past. Is there like something we improve? Because I think this is under the what we should do differently section, right? So,
Yeah, I think maybe originally this was when do we wipe the board, which we're not going to do. So like, I think the only question now, and James, you have your hand up, so you can go in just a second. I think the only question is the current guidance clear enough in the handbook? Mark, seems like you were just following that and applying it.
I was reading in between the lines, but I'll make it more clear as I'm doing more updates.
Okay, cool. So that's one good action to take away. All right, go for it, James.
I muted myself. I was gonna say if this information about what went into each release is really important, which I agree with it is, do we want to try like publishing that as some form of artifact out of the end of a release that isn't a spreadsheet? Because like right now, for example, the 124 release spreadsheet is in my JetStack company Google Drive, and if that ever went away, that would break history for everything forever. And I'm sure that all of the old spreadsheets are in a very similar situation as well. So do we want to go back and start archiving this into, I don't know, something? Maybe that's a SIG release question rather than a retro question, but.
Nabarun and then Leo.
Leo was first.
Oh, okay, sorry. Leo, Nabarun, and then Mark.
I remember Sasha opened an issue about collecting metrics about the releases. So I think there's already like something not in the works, but something that we want to do. So I guess this would be basically adding to
that. James, the answer to your question is the KEPS website and the artifacts that we push every day. So when the author updates the KEP YAML, that gets stored in history. And we have a clear provenance of that data. And that gets stored, that gets generated into the KEPS website every night. So we kind of have that archive already.
What KEPS website?
I can share you a link.
I was gonna say the same thing, that which states and when graduated, as long as they get updated, is in the keps.yaml.
It happened in the last 2-3 months. So
Cool. You to me.
It's pretty neat. Okay, so that wraps up everything that we had in the what we'll do better. So we've got some stuff in the parking lot section. So we'll pick up from there from the until mid-cycle retro block. Federico, you have the first one. This is surely always like this, but 50% of feature blogs opt in come the last day.
Yeah.
Substantial part of the work is for
We
shadows.
already discussed this. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So move away.
Yep. Did we move this up somewhere already? Should we just delete this one? Or
I think so. I think, yeah, nothing is added by that. So
okay. Mark, cron job or CLI to remove milestones and labels from enhancements that do not meet the deadline.
I don't remember why I added that one. I think this was just part of, this is one of the, what my thoughts were, one of the kind of more manual processes of the enhancements team is after code freeze or after enhancement freeze and code freeze, going through and checking to make sure that all of that criteria is met, and then removing, like commenting on each issue and saying, like switching it from tracked yes to tracked no, and then removing the milestones from those jobs. At the point where we're at least enhancements freeze, every one of the checks that we do should be able to be done via a tool just by checking the state of the main of enhancements repository. Would anybody be interested or have any objections to somebody going and developing a CLI to like check that and potentially do changes? I see Navaroon laughing.
Go for it, number.
Leo, you're first.
Oh, Leo, go first.
Yeah, so we had a lot of exception requests, and for me the deadline was at 3 a.m. and it's like if you receive like 10 exception requests or something, and then you need to recheck all of them. I mean, you have like a very strict deadline, so the idea was just to have like some tooling to remove all the labels and milestones, but yeah, this was just basically maybe like some tool that could help this process, because otherwise it takes like 10 minutes, maybe longer, or maybe half an hour or something like this. Maybe you miss something, and this is like very important. This is like a very important deadline, so some tooling might be useful.
Okay. So this topic has come up many times over the years, and Jeremy and I headed out on an adventure to solve this exactly 2 years back, with a solution called receipts, which essentially was not that scalable. But if you want to find a solution to it, I am happy to collaborate and try to find something which works out right now with the current state of how we do enhancements. So the idea is great. That motivated us to work on receipts, but maybe we can think of an alternate solution and not receipts. So I'm cool with like collaborating on this. So feel free to ping in there.
I'll put a little bit of thought into it, and I think Xander just posted a tool too. I mean, most of the checks are just
back like when I was enhancements lead, and it's just a little CLI I wrote that just pulls data from GitHub and provides a different interface to keps. But like, if you wanted something that's not receipts, you can build on that, or just look at the code. And I don't know, it's just a thing that I did a while back.
most of the issues is just in the kept.yaml, so I'm guessing that's what you parse, Xander. Yeah, I'll take a look at this, and then if it see how helpful it is in the upcoming release.
So there was something written by Harsha, who was, I think, in the bug triage team this time, back during 1.19, which tries to, like, he wrote a tool which tries to automate like a lot of manual processes we used to do earlier. Maybe we can take like inspirations from there as well. I can share a link shortly.
Okay, yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Next one is from Grace, Code Freeze project board tracking. Do we have any
Yeah,
insights?
This
Go.
is like
Greg.
a very, very short one. So we created like shortly after Code Freeze a new view. This is like basically something that we improved on like during the cycle. So created a new view for Code Freeze just to track the status, because we received a lot of like exception requests, and it was a little difficult to track all of them. And this view was kind of handy, I guess.
Okay, so that one's resolved. Awesome. Next up, Leo, improve the release process to better.
With
incorporate
that
large
one too,
PRs.
though,
Oh, go for it.
we should just make sure that updates to that and how to use that get into the one of the either the release lead or the enhancements handbook.
Okay. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just include that in some updates too, but I wasn't aware of that, so I might reach out Leo to see exactly what happened. Then.
Yeah, actually, this is also something I can also add to the lead handbook, because if the lead accepts or he rejects an exception request, he or she can also just update the view. So yeah, I can mention that.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, the next one was the improve the release process to better incorporate large PRs. There's a lot of stuff written here. Leo, do you want to walk us through it?
Sure. So this was already discussed shortly in the SIG release meeting a couple of weeks ago. This is basically an action item from an exception request we received, and we discussed this exception request for quite some time. And at the end, it did not make the deadline, because it was too big and not reviewed and so on. And there was like some discussion around how we can improve to better incorporate large PRs into the releases, because this one in particular missed the deadline like a couple of times. And the author tries to get it in for like a year or longer. And the question was basically how the release team could maybe improve the release cycle, or like some processes or something like this, to make sure that these large PRs get in the release. So this is certainly not like a topic just for the release team. Maybe at the end, I don't know if there's like some tasks for us to do. Maybe this is like purely for the reviewers and the other SIG leads. But yeah, so there was also a thread from Tim over the mailing group. He shared like some processes how he triages those PRs, and like some best practices from his side. This definitely contributes to the like overall achievement or idea of incorporate those PRs. And there's one proposal from Tim that we discussed in the SIG release meeting about, for example, having like another deadline for XL PRs. So XL PRs should get in 2 weeks maybe before the others, so that this entire like stretches out or something like this. But we discussed this in the SIG release meeting, and everybody was kind of on the -1 on adding another deadline. And there's also another idea from Tim about assembling a review team. Not sure if this is, I mean, this this could potentially live in the release team or somewhere else. Yeah, maybe there's some other ideas as well.
All right, I have some thoughts on this, but Mark had his hand up first, then Nabaru, and then I'll go.
Yeah, I was gonna say this issue was discussed at a few of the chairs and TL's meetings too. There's more than one PR, but I know that that have been in this case where they slip. And some of the thoughts were like how first somebody was like, hey, what if we do feature branches again? And then everybody was against the feature branches because it's a lot more overhead. And then people still want to re-review the code just because there's so many different like changes that happen with this too. And then I think like one of the, at least in the chairs and TL's meetings that like we really spent a lot of time discussing, it's like, well, what about breaking PRs up into smaller PRs? And one of the issues that a lot of people said is that that tends to lead to half implemented features getting into the code base. And one of the big concerns is that once API changes, especially to stable APIs, make it into the code base and then go out with a release, they're essentially in there forever. So for these larger PRs that do tend to touch stable APIs, there's a lot of caution around making sure that the implementation is correct when they go in, because there's not that flexibility to iterate on alpha and beta APIs. And then so I think that this, like these PRs that tend to drag out and don't get broken up are a smaller subset of like XL or XXL PRs too, but we really didn't have a good way of doing this. And these do tend to just get punted and punted and punted. So I just wanted to add a little bit more flavor to that. Go ahead, either Jeremy or Navarun.
Go for it, Navarun.
Thanks, Mark, actually, for giving the context from the chairs and TL's meeting. I was also wondering, like, I was thinking, like, if this is actually a SIG release problem, and I thought, like, it's more to be like a chairs and TL's plus contributor experience kind of problem that we should solve. What I kind of understand from this problem is, like, how do we reduce friction of, like, reviewing a 10,000 lines of change PR? And we have to solve that problem somehow. One more thing that so when the idea of like adding another milestone came into picture, I was thinking, like, what stops people from reviewing the code even when we are in code freeze or
Exactly.
we're not in the release cycle. For example, code freeze happened a month back. We don't stop anyone from reviewing the code. It's just that they can't get the code merged until code thaw happens a month from code freeze. So this is a kind of cultural change I probably want to see. But then again, this is not the right forum to discuss that. Probably the chairs and TL's meeting plus contribex, and maybe if, since this also kind of is like non-technical governance of the project, and that's like steering starter. So I'm not sure like who is the correct group, but doesn't seem like SIG release or release team to be the best audience for this.
I agree. And I think this has happened as long as we've had releases. Like the sidecar cap comes to mind, right? Like we in 120, I think 120, maybe it was 119. There was, this had been like the fourth or fifth time that this PR had, like the cap had been merged, and it was approved, and somebody had been working on the PR, and it was a big PR, and it touched a lot of things, and it just kept going from release to release because it never met the deadline for code freeze, and the person would have to rebase it, and the person would have to rebase it, and that is not a SIG release problem. That's not a release team problem. In the end, it turned out that they shouldn't have approved the cap, but nobody felt like saying no. They were trying to be accommodating and making sure like the person was feeling like their work was being appreciated. But then when it came to reviewing the PR, because it was so big and it touched so many things and people had reservations about it, it just never made it over the line. So it's a combination of like Navarun said, it's a contributor experience problem. It's a governance kind of problem. It's people, we've moved to this, and that one was bad too, because we would always ping, like at that point in time, we always pinged the author of the cap and the author of the PR to say, is this going to make it? Is this going to make it? Is this going to make it? Now that we have SIGs opting things in, they should take more ownership of things, especially for these big PRs or these things that are going to be big, and say, yeah, we're going to dedicate time to do this. Maybe we're going to dedicate time to do it during code freeze for the next cycle. And this one in particular, like, it didn't get reviewed by the time, but like, I think in that thread, we said, like, you can get this ready to land at the beginning of the next cycle and get ready to go for this. So I don't think that there is work to do here. It's like putting my SIG release set up. I don't think we should change deadlines. We shouldn't add things. This isn't a SIG release problem. This isn't a release team problem. This is just a general Kubernetes change is hard. There are not enough people to review big things. So those folks should take ownership of things and opt in correctly, or be a little more restrictive on, we're not going to do 35 things this time. We're going to do 10 things this time to have better review bandwidth. Okay, Mark, you have your hand up again.
I was going to say a lot of what you just said. I think it's a review bandwidth and then a contributor experience issue. Like, I think a lot of times people who have lots of reviews, like the API reviewers, like they and people who are reviewing these large PRs, they're constantly like trying to balance, like, there's one big PR, and in this case, I think everybody wanted this PR to go, and this was the in-place pod vertical auto scaling. Do I have a limited amount of time? Do I focus on this one PR, or do I focus on getting 20 other small PRs in, like enhancements in? And I think that maybe one thing is that these reviews need to happen by both the SIG and the API review team. And I think I've seen a change in SIG Node, especially around like acknowledging, like, we have bandwidth to do one big PR and then maybe a couple like other small PRs. But the API reviewers, like when Tim was on this, I don't know if they have the same way of balancing that, and the PRR team too, across all of the different SIGs KEPs that are coming in quite as easily. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a SIG release problem either.
All right. Any other discussion on this one before we move on? We've got 15 minutes left or so. All right. Next one up. Federico, deprecations GitHub tag for PRs to improve filtering for comms. We
already
discussed this one, kind deprecation. Okay, Leo, the release notes team uses some tracking issues in each cycle to follow up on the work. In general, I think this is good for tracking tasks and transparently distributing work. How would we do the same for docs, enhancements, and comps?
Yes, pretty much what I already wrote there. So I think release notes has a couple of issues. They created each release to follow up all these tasks, and I think this is kind of nice, also for transparency and just to follow up who is doing what and to distribute work and everything. And also you can attach those issues to the board. So overall, the board can become a little bit more useful. So at the moment, we don't track a lot of things because we don't have any issues. But essentially, we have a lot of issues, but we don't like create issues for it. We just basically do it. So perhaps this would be like an interesting pilot for next release, maybe to create like a couple of more issues just to test it out if it helps. Would be my idea or suggestion maybe.
Does anybody have any feedback or thoughts on this one?
I like the idea. This is exactly what we do in release engineering. And it's good to have like tracking issues for certain big milestones.
I think if we want to follow this up, maybe we don't want to update the handbooks just yet because it's maybe just a pilot for now, but perhaps this would be something for Xander to transport to the team leads, I guess.
I think that's a great idea. Do you want to, does Xander, here's Xander still here. Xander, how do you feel about?
No, I think it's
highlighting some-
good. Yeah, I need to reopen the PR, not the PR, the issue for getting everybody access that's like mentioned in the current handbook. And initially I was gonna wait until Leo's PR merge, but I can just adapt the issue to include what's there. I like the idea of having a tracking issue like that. I think it works really well for the releases, and it can be adapted quite well to the whole process of the release too.
Right. So also the idea behind it was, for example, if there's like, I don't know, send out the mid-cycle updates, maybe also create like a dedicated issue for that and discuss maybe the contents. So a little more granular work as well, but yeah.
Yeah, it's more granular, but it also provides like a good forum for discussion, like a good like place that with an artifact that tracks discussion. It's easier to track than like a Slack thread.
Yeah.
All right, cool. I think that's a great takeaway to try for 127. All right, and then looking at these last two, should we focus on syncing more with the Golang team to better anticipate patches? So that specifically is in regard to our delay right now, like for 126, and
Yeah.
is that a fair assessment?
Right. I think I already kind of know the answer. Or, I mean, we're already in sync with the Golang team, and I don't know if it's possible to anticipate, for example, security patches or some other things even better. And as far as I know, we already kind of schedule the release in that way that we don't push the new changes out on the same day or in the same week as Golang packages are getting updated. As far as I know, so probably we cannot improve that, but I was just thinking because this, like from the last 3 releases, we postponed 2 because of the Golang patch releases or updates. So maybe there's like some things still to improve.
So we have a good idea about when regular patch releases for Go are going to happen. That's fairly regular. The security things we're not going to get better. They tell us there's a distribution list that they notify that patches are going to happen, but just like the Kubernetes embargoed CVEs, like those don't go out ahead of time super early. So I think cases like this, we're going to have to be reactive and go with the flow as much as we can.
Right. So the list is the Golang Google group, right? Or is there another list? Okay. Awesome. So no takeaway for this one, I guess.
And then this last one is done already. We have put in place the ability to pause and stop the fast forward job. So thanks, Jordan, for finding this, and everybody for fixing it. All right, that brings us to the end of our agenda today. We have a bunch of action items we've identified throughout the document, so we can go ahead and I'll go through and try to pull some of these out and add them to the action items listed at the bottom. James, if you want to help me with that, that would be awesome too.
I had a question about one of the action items that was actually identified in the first meeting,
okay.
and I didn't realize until after the meeting last time. So before we had talked about potentially like making sure that the SIG chairs knew that they should be responsible for shepherding the enhancements in. And I did find in the community, let me find which page it is. I'll link to it in a little bit, but it did say that it said SIG chairs should be responsible for maintaining the like statement of enhancements through the release, but they may delegate it to other people on the team. And then that brought back a memory. I thought a while ago, Lori Apple tried to introduce a role of an enhancements liaison. And then I couldn't find any more. I had forgotten about that. I wasn't really super involved with the release team at that time. Does anybody know what happened with that pilot?
It kind of just fizzled.
Okay.
Say is the best description. I think the intent was good, but it ultimately required participation from everyone involved, and I think people just kind of fell back into the process that they were used to. So it fizzled.
I think part of a problem as well is that people that did it ended up sort of responsible for stuff, but with no power to do anything, because they were ultimately just passing messages between SIG leads and the release team while having no authority is the wrong word, but no like thing to do themselves. So it just wasn't very appealing for people, I don't think. So no one did it. So it didn't end up going anywhere. But I agree, the idea was well placed.
I know for the 2 SIGs that I was active with, they kind of just stepped away from the project mid-release too, so it didn't really work out, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and update or double check that everything is sorry, I'm looking for that. I'll find it later and link it.
Okay.
The wording that we already have, but it does
Thanks.
say that the chairs are responsible.
All right. With that, unless anybody has anything else, we'll call it a day, 5 minutes early. Thank everybody for attending this retro and all the feedback, the retro yesterday and all the great feedback and the first retro mid-cycle. Looking forward to 127 and good luck to everybody. I hope everybody has good time off if you're taking any time off in December, January, anytime before the end of 127. Enjoy.
Everyone.
Thanks for hosting, Jeremy, and thanks for taking notes.
Cheers.
Just one thing before people drop
Go
off.
for it.
This is the last call for 1.26. Thanks everyone who worked towards 1.26 and making it a great release. And all the best to the 1.27 team. You'll do great as usual.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks.